Right, hi, my name is Matt Abeti. I performed at the Magna Theater for, I think, 10-ish years, and then I did improv for like 4 or 5 years before that in Washington, D.C. Yeah, and today's topic is I'm still getting used to doing the YouTube thing, so if someone told me that at the top of the videos I should be like, these are my credentials, but like, yeah, I was a performer at the Magna Theater for 10 years. Maybe more or less. But in any case, today's topic is around building a great group game and how to do a great group game. Um, so this is going to be 6 tips on doing great group games, and I'll like start by saying this. These are going to be my kind of general comments, I guess, before I dive into like each tip. But group games, in my opinion, shouldn't happen in jams. You should really be in a place where you are um, rehearsed and everyone has a sense of how you approach a group game, because group games can tend to be very chaotic. If you've ever seen like a jam where like anybody and everybody can walk in, it suddenly creates like these huge problems. And um, you know um, it ends up being kind of like, in its kind of worst case, like a bunch of people fighting over attention to see who's gonna get like the funny idea in, um, or kind of the best case scenario is like it can turn into an unfocused show, or unfocused scene. I guess that's like the middle case scenario. It's the most likely case scenario, and then the best case scenario is some very charismatic person comes in and everyone just jumps on board with what that person's doing. And that happens so rarely. And even when it does happen, it's usually because enough people are seasoned that like everyone kind of gets the picture, even if you're a more novice person. The human part of your brain that goes like, oh, I don't want to be not part of like what everybody else is doing kicks in. So yeah, so if you're gonna do group games, I would say like make sure that they're in a format, and then specifically if it's like something your team does or your practice group does or anything like that, just make sure that you have dedicated time where you just work on the group game. Because I think if you're just gonna work on like general scenes and general scene notes and stuff like that, um, um, the group games they are just such a different beast that the show will suffer, especially if you're doing something like a Herald, which is heavily reliant on these group games to be like a key component of the show. I'm sure that there are lots of other formats that have group games, but it's like kind of the most famous one. Um, and I will say this before I kind of dive in, like developing the muscle to do a great group game is a really, really important improv skill, um, because it takes what I think is one of the hardest things in improv for somebody who wants to be funny. Um, and it really is like, like to use a gym metaphor, it like really piles on the weight and makes you carry it, which is going to be the first tip. So the first tip here is, in group games, even more than in regular improv scenes, you need to be patient and focus in on listening as much as possible. So especially in a Herald, if there's one person on the back line, there are 8 people doing the Herald, which is pretty normal. That means you have to listen 7 times and speak once. And for a lot of like very overeager improvisers, very early improvisers, people who really want to prove that they're funny, people who are really excited about like doing a move, or like they have an idea and they just kind of want to blurt it out. They can suffer a whole lot in group games, um, uh, because um, unless the team immediately listens to and jumps on board and does their idea and only their idea, um, it produces kind of these like sloppy scenes that have way too many ideas in them. So the next 5 tips, I think, you know, just we're gonna probably touch on this one tip over and over and over and over and over again, which is like, what's going on here? what is my teammate saying or trying to do or trying to accomplish, and how can I make good on their idea. And then I'm going to sneak in, there's one scenario where I would say, like, definitely, if you're listening for this, this will be an opportunity for you to go, like, the scene has to change, or we're going to be in a lot of trouble. So, second tip is my perspective, my point of view is an improv scene, a really great improv scene has 1 to 2 perspectives and can have as many characters as possible, but you really want to have only 1 to 2 perspectives. So what do I mean by perspective? So let's say that let's say we're just like a bunch of parents who, this is kind of one of my favorite scene types or scenes. I've done probably 100 variations of the scene, but like, let's say we're a bunch of parents and we're watching our children like at a soccer game or football game or whatever, and one person just goes like, God, I love my kid. You know, every time it like brings a tear to my eye to see them just up there. You know, I remember when he was barely able to draw. That's one perspective. So that perspective is usually an emotion, plus a little something else, an action, behavior, or whatever. In this case, the emotion is like kind of nostalgia, and then the behavior is kind of like really reminiscing and getting lost in your own kind of remembering of the kid. And so that's perspective 1. Perspective 2 might be someone goes like, yeah, I love him, but I fucking hate, you know, like I don't know if YouTube like is mad whenever you cuss, but like, you know, like, oh, you know, like, he's sweet, but God, he really gets, he really pisses me off, you know, whatever. He's like, he's frustrating, you know, doesn't do well in school, but I love him, So 2 perspectives. One perspective is lovely, nostalgia, blah, blah, blah. Second perspective is same kid, but he infuriates me, or my kid infuriates me. You know, like being a dad also means having to put up with a bunch of garbage. Okay, 2 perspectives. Now, in a group game, there's a couple ways that like this can go cleanly. So clean way number 1 is the third person goes like, that's crazy, man. Like, you should maybe like, you know, kids are supposed to be a little frustrating. Like, I look out there and the only thing that I see is my beautiful little angel swinging his bat or whatever. So in this situation, we have 3 characters, but we have 2 perspectives. Okay, so perspective 1 is character 1 and 2 are purely like, we love our kid. You know, every time I look at him, I just see a little miracle. And the second perspective, which was person number 2, is I have that plus this anger and resentment that I have towards my kid, right? It just kind of gets me steamed. So even this wholesome moment, I'm just full of anger. My point of view is now we have the pattern locked, which means that the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th performers all have to carry the same perspective, which is I look at my kid and I just think, you know, where would I be in life? I'd probably be dead in a ditch without this kid. And by the way, person number 2, what is wrong with you? You know, what is wrong with you? Because, you know, right. So now we would have 7 people, 7 characters, but still 2 perspectives. We would have 6 people who see only a baby angel whenever they see their kid playing baseball or tennis or whatever. And we'd have 1 person who's kind of a sour grape. It's a very simple scene. But the example here is to show you that we can have 7 characters, but 2 perspectives. The other way we can do this is, let's say person we have person number 2. It gets me steamed. Then we go back to person number 1, and person number 1 goes, you know what? I hate to admit it, but you're right. I do look out at that kid and I go, You're adorable, but God, you're a piece of shit. Um, Now we have one perspective, right? One perspective is these parents, these two parents have this tension in them, and that tension is carrying both the absolute love of their kid along with this resentment of having the kid. So my point of view on a group game is now characters 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, however many more characters are in this group game, all have to share this one perspective, which is this tension of loving and hating your kid. Okay. Um, Notice inside of the scene we did a ton of yes anding. So we didn't just disagree right off the bat. We had to take the point of view and like add a little bit to it. Makes it really clean. Doesn't mean we have to, but makes it extra clean whenever we fully yes and the other person. We try to be as much in the same peas in the pod, same perspective, same outlook on life, with a little difference, a little tiny tweak. Okay. Um, but I would also say, and this is tip 2, is take the dumbest perspective you can. Comedy is not about nuance. It is not about like complexity and if only, you also considered like all these other factors and who's right. You want to take the dumbest perspective, which is like, one of my favorite group game scenes that I ever saw was a guy just came out onto this scene and just went, brains. And the person just pointed and went, brains. And then everyone else jumped on board and were like, brains. And they started eating this very big brain, right? And they were just like, brains. And that was the whole group game, was watching them kind of just shove brains into their mouths and then turn to each other once in a while and like even more enthusiastically like exclaim how much they were like stoked to have brains. But if you sat down and you were like, prison reform, I have some ideas about prison reform, in this situation and under those circumstances, and have you ever considered the mental health of the characters and blah 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 blah. Save it for your podcast, right? Especially if we're trying to just quickly get our idea out for a group game, we want it to be dead simple, which is like, I love brains, right? And if someone is going to have a secondary perspective or contrary perspective there, we want to make it super clear and easy for them to not only get on board, but also add their little tweak. So if we go back to the brains example, someone might go like, brains, and maybe a third or fourth person, decides to like add a little tweak to it and goes like, liver? And people are like, brains. And we see one guy, like everyone else is like really excited about the brains, and he's sort of like, 6 people go, brains, and he goes, brains. That little twist there, which is like, yeah, I'm also on board. Yes, we all like brains. But also that this one person's little tweak would be, yeah, I also like brains. Adds this texture to the game, right? But notice it didn't happen because, we all did like a different take on brains, right? We listened to what was going on, right? We kept really patient, which is like, we like brains. Simple idea. We don't need to add anything more to it, so we're just going to keep it really simple and dumb. And what's it called? If we do introduce like a little, like we decide that one person's going to be have a perspective that's a little off, or we're going to have a second perspective, not just one. We're going to keep it really simple also, right? It's not going to be like, well, haven't you guys ever thought about these three things? It's really going to have to be something that is clear, succinct. If you can't get it out in like a single line, it's probably going to derail the group game, because we're now going to have to explore and understand the full picture of what's going on with this person. You can do it in a group game, and make it happen, but kind of the most delicious group games are almost like id part of your brain, like really kind of the most simple, thuggish kind of part of your mind. You can do a more talky group game, but I would say even in a more talky group game, you have to abandon all nuance. So it would really have to be something like, um, what's it called? I don't know. Like, sure, like, or I don't know why I do a lot of scenes like that. Sure, huffing glue isn't good for you, but kind of fun, right? Imagine it's like at a doctor's convention. Right? It's a bunch of doctors are like, there's a glue huffing epidemic or whatever, and it's like, yeah, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. But have you guys tried it? This is kind of nice. In any case, notice it's like very, very dumb, very, very simple, almost thoughtless. Um, I would say, like, if you kind of have a visceral reaction, you're probably about to make a really good group game move. If you thought about it for too long, really take a moment. Take a moment with yourself. Okay. Next tip, fourth tip. Avoid brainstorming scenes / stay active. So here's a group game that I see very often. It's very dangerous. Group game sounds like this. Hey everybody, let's get inside this boardroom. We need a new business idea. We need to find a way to sell this bubble gum. We have to come up with a new Avengers movie or whatever. here's what's dangerous about that. That means that what you're essentially saying is like, hey everybody, can we brainstorm jokes in front of the audience? Because now everyone has to pitch their idea, and the idea that they pitch needs to be funny. And if the audience doesn't laugh after the pitch, very often I see, even pre-season improv teams, someone will go, well, that idea is bad. And now the audience goes like, yeah, that idea was bad. And if you do that 2 or 3 times, then the audience goes like, oh, the scene's bad, because these guys all don't think that they're funny. They don't think that their teammates are funny, so I don't think that they're funny. So so it creates kind of this vicious cycle. And it's not that the audience turns on you; they forgive you as soon as you wipe the scene and start a new one. But it introduces judgment to each move rather than being in the moment, and judgment kind of slows down improv scenes. Curiosity and taking action moves an improv scene forward. Second thing that I see very often that you should avoid, that's kind of a brainstorming, anti-active move, is to talk about what you're doing. So like start digging a ditch, and everyone's like, digging this ditch is really hard. And everyone's like, yep, digging this ditch is hard. The problem with it is now we're doing the thing we're talking about, and it's like very anti-human. It's not normal dialogue. Most of the time, if you're like I washed dishes when I was like, first starting out and working, and what's it called? You're definitely not talking about washing dishes all day. What you're doing is kind of washing dishes and being like, hey, what's going on, dude? Like, blah, 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 blah. Is it busy out there? You're trying to get your mind off of that thing. And also, it produces the necessary tension that creates great comedy. So, imagine another scene. Let's say we had 2 people who were at a yoga retreat, and they sit around talking about yoga the whole time. And they're like, yeah, I'm getting this big stretch, I'm getting a nice burn, whatever else. There's no contrast. And comedy kind of needs some point of disalignment some point where there's like an improv director, coach, said he always called it a twang, which is like normal scene, but there's a little twang, like something is off, something's funny, something's weird. And so one of the best ways to do that is like, now let's go back to the yoga retreat, and let's say that there are two corporate executives, and they're stretching and whatever else, and one of them just goes like, yeah, come to this retreat because helps me get centered and in touch with my fellow man. And the other guy goes, yeah, yeah, totally, me too. What do you do? I'm CEO of Halliburton or whatever. The other person goes like, oh my god, I know, I ran into you. I met you in Iraq when we were like doing this and whatever. Um, um, and what's it called? You'll probably find humor in two people who maybe like share this perspective on like, sure, like, um, invading other countries is bad, but it's really good for business. Like we made billions of dollars that year in just crude oil alone or whatever. And the other person goes like, yeah, 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 and he's like, oh, now we got to go into downward dog, child's pose or whatever. Um, and having to watch two characters like reconcile. I don't know why I think that's kind of goofy, but reconcile this retreat where they're like fully at peace and getting connected and we're all in unity or whatever else, with the other side of them, which is just like, whatever we got to do to get oil, because I mean, this country runs on oil, right? So we can invade 30 countries for all I care. Um, you're gonna find better group game opportunities there. But if it's like five people who are all digging a hole and who all work in construction or whatever, then what's it called? Oh my god, I'm having a brain fart. But yeah, you're gonna have like white on white. You're gonna have like the same color on top of the same color. So, um, if you're gonna jump in and start knitting something or whatever, immediately start going like, ah, my kid has prom this weekend or whatever, and for everyone else to be like, me too, my kid has prom, and it's like, we know how that's gonna go or whatever, right? So now our shared perspective is, we all have kids, they're all gonna go into prom, and we're all kind of like over it. It's just like, oh, I get it. Um, so yeah, that's just a great way of making sure that there's like, um, a little bit cracked open in the scene that creates an opportunity for something funny and different. Okay, the third kind of like part of this bigger tip, which is to avoid brainstorming and stay active, is that this doesn't necessarily mean like moving, but to have a sense of purpose as to why these 6 or 7 or whatever 10, 30 people are all in the same room. An example of this might be like, we're all in line for the new iPhone. Okay. Um, that gives us a sense of purpose. We're all here for the iPhone. And of course, you shouldn't talk about getting the iPhone. What you should do is talk about something else, because, you already share the iPhone thing. What's dangerous here, and I think that this is also like a criticism that I have, is like, I don't like couch scenes. Couch scenes are, kind of like, in a lot of like sitcoms they have this, and they can get away with a sitcom because they write it, and so they can plan out the scene, um, and they can make it active, or they're using it as a device. But a bunch of people sitting on a couch with no idea why they're there, or what they're doing, or what the topic of conversation is, kind of staring off into space, produces a very slow, dangerous improv scene. So always taking kind of a little bit of your cerebral part of you out of the equation, and immediately getting to some kind of action that everyone else can mimic alongside you. Right? If you just start knitting, or doing this kind of thing, or throwing your baby in the air and catching. I'm doing a lot of baby stuff recently. Throwing your baby up in the air and catching them. Other people can do that alongside you, and you're kind of immediately off to the races without having to sit on the couch and be like, so, how's tricks? Okay. Fifth tip here. I would say leave yourself open to being swept up in the scene. Normally, I would say I'm a very big person. I'm a very big annoyance person. So I studied annoyance for a couple years, and one of their big things is like, don't let go of your deal, right? Which I'm a big advocate for. It's like, if you have a point of view or a character or perspective or whatever, that's who you are. And suddenly changing course in the middle of a scene is a total betrayal to the audience, because the audience spent time listening to you, and you've also kind of burned part of your time on stage. You've kind of like hit the reset button, and it's just, I don't know. I see improvisers abandon who they are, and they sometimes have, fairly successful scenes. But I'm always just like, I think that there was a huge missed opportunity. And I think in a group game, there's, especially if the more people there are, the more forgiving the audience is, and the more forgiving I think you should be towards yourself if you abandon your thing. So I'll give you an example. You're doing a scene. Let's go back to that, like, what's it called? The knitting, and people are like, oh, my kids are going to prom or whatever else. Let's say, we're like, oh, you know what, everyone's going to go on there. The next person immediately goes like, oh, have you seen who the prom king and prom queen are? And the third person goes like, I did. Oh, like, what a pair of lookers or whatever. I don't know. This is already getting a gross territory because this is like adults, but they are 18-year-olds. But in any case, the real important thing is your first perspective was around like being kind of over it for prom, and the next two people's perspectives is gossiping about who the prom king and prom queen are, right? Or whatever, right? In this situation, I would say if you were person number one and you kind of have a quick moment where you're like, my teammates didn't listen to my idea, have that moment for like a split second, forgive them, forgive yourself, and then immediately jump on board with like prom king and prom queen. It's like, did you see them? They are gonna get into trouble or whatever, right? Like, like if there's a pair that looks like, they're a pair of lookers, and you know what happens, peak in high school, or yeah, that's crazy, but what's it called? Get swept up. If everyone else is on to a thing or onto a perspective, or they've locked into a dumber idea that, whatever, just go with the crowd. Unless you're the one odd person out. But if you see that you're going to be like, there's perspective one and perspective two, and you're going to be perspective three, or you're already hearing that there is a perspective three, and then now there's going to be a perspective four or whatever. Well, actually, no. If you see that there's like a perspective two and a perspective three, and then the fourth person goes after either perspective two or three, right? So I'm going to go back in time. So what's it called? You started out with an idea. You had a perspective, another perspective, third perspective. Fourth person reinforces perspective two or three, but everyone forgot about you. Okay? I would say abandon yourself and follow whatever person number four did. So person number one goes, I love, what's it called? Person number one goes, let's do another example. Let's see, something from my notes that I said. Oh yeah, the kids watching, the parents watching the kids. Oh, love my kid. Person number two goes like, yeah, but I hate him. Person number three goes like, I get sad in moments like this. I get sad in moments like this because I just realized that, time is fleeting, right? So these are three perspectives. Perspective one is, I love my kid. you know, I feel nothing but warm butterflies. Perspective 2 is I get kind of angry with them because they just suck the life out of me. And perspective 3 is I get sad because, you know, life is fleeting and, you know, maybe I only have so much more time together. If perspective 4 is I hate them kids, right? You have to abandon your thing, because now we have what's it called? The fourth person has made these the two perspectives, and I would say if you're a really seasoned improviser, you should jump in, and you're worried about the rest of the team not kind of like following the pattern. You should jump in and reinforce the choice of person number 4. Okay, because the real thing that's going to make the group game work well is having no more than 2 perspectives, 1 to 2. And this is where the listening part is really important. Notice that a moment ago, like I kind of paused and I was like, well, angry at those kids, what's it called? Nostalgia for the kids, angry at those kids, sad that life is fleeting. This one kind of sounds like nostalgia, but it isn't, right? It's very different from nostalgia. Nostalgia, they're growing up, and, you know, every time I see my kid, I think about the little baby boy, the little bundle of joy that was inside me. This third one is not someone who's delighting and having wistful memories. This person is in mourning, right? This person's sad that this current moment, it will disappear. Perspectives 1 and 3 feel similar. They're in the same family, but they're actually very different. And so it's kind of a funny thing about a group game where it's like we strive for the dumbest perspective, but you have to listen at a level 10 to get the perspective precise, right? So let's use the brains example, right? Because the brains example is so clean and clear and crisp, right? The point of view, the behavior, the perspective is I like brains, right? So we had one example where someone was like, I like brains, which is not I like brains. It's I reluctantly like brains. And let's say the third person was like, I like brains, giggity, giggity. Yeah, that's liking brains. But it's liking brains in a totally different way, right? Oh my god, that's so dark. In any case, right? So another way of thinking about this is like we can all be happy, but like there are variations on happiness, and our goal in the group game is not to get into the details of what kinds of happiness we all are. It's to reinforce the one kind of happiness we're all talking about. So if we're all happy because, I don't know, maybe we're all rich people and we just saw a 4-year-old trip on his shoelaces because we're all evil, right? That kind of happiness isn't the same kind of happiness of like having a lollipop to yourself because you just enjoy lollipops, right? It's like Schadenfreude. So like if we're in a scene, we all experience Schadenfreude. Not different kinds of happiness, not a different perspective on, you know, like what's funny. There isn't one rich guy there who's also laughing, but what he's really laughing at is like, what's it called? That everybody else is like, that we're all evil, bad people, right? If we're going to have one perspective, that perspective has to be keyed in on that one specific idea. Now, if we want to introduce a disjunction, we can introduce a different version of happiness, a different kind of flavor of what's going on, and that will be our second perspective. But whenever we're trying to formulate one of them, we want to get swept up in this very particular kind of philosophy, point of view, whatever else it is. Okay? So all of this is to say we're going to be patient and listen, but we're going to get swept up in the idea that is becoming most popular, or we're going to be the one person who is distinct from the rest of the group. Okay. Now, can you do group games that have like 10 perspectives and whatever else? Yes, sure. But my goal in this video is basically to say, like, what is the cleanest, most efficient way of creating your group game? And what is the way that's going to produce the most consistent results? Sure, could you have 3 perspectives? Yeah. Can you have 4? Yeah. But it starts to get really hard, and it requires like another level of discipline. So, in this one instance, I would say it's okay to abandon yourself or abandon your point of view early on if it means that you're getting swept up in the majority opinion, or you're going to be the lone, outsider voice. Okay, remember, so 2 perspectives. At our best, we're going to keep it dumb and simple. We're going to be patient and listen as much as possible. And we're going to use that listening to get really precise about like the kind of point of view that we're reinforcing, right? So you're kind of listening for those key nuances there. Okay. This is the caveat to all of what I said. If you're in a group game, like in a jam, or for whatever reason in the show, your team kind of loses their sense of discipline, you've lost your sense of discipline, and now we have 3 or 4, 5 perspectives. None of it's not 2 anymore. We haven't topped out at 2. It's not a single one. We now have like 4 different ideas that are all floating around. This is the place where the safest move is to cling to your idea and really slow down, say less, really, really and truly say less. And I'll give you an example of this. I started out a scene where I was like, I am hungry. Like, I was like, the very first thing I was like, I could really use like a chicken wing or whatever. And the next person was like, we are at a funeral, right? And then, what's it called? The next person was like, I feel like I wish I'd spent more time with this person. And the next person was like, are you kidding me? This person was a jerk. And I was like, uh-oh. Like, we just had 3, 4 perspectives happen. And so, suddenly the scene turned into like, this person was kind of a jerk, but they were kind of nice. And I dated this person and blah, 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 blah. And it's just like a bunch of different perspectives or whatever. And I just kind of sat and listened and I was kind of hoping that like some point, like there was going to be like the some of the perspectives were going to congeal, or that I was just waiting for like an opportunity. And then this like quiet moment hit in the scene after like 3 minutes of someone talking about this dead guy who were at his funeral, and we're talking about all the stuff that's going on. It was like a long pause, and I just went, like, buffalo chicken wings with like some ranch would be so good right now. You guys hungry? And that was the button. That was the thing that made the audience laugh, and there was a big swipe afterward. And I would say it kind of works because I've kind of invented 2 perspectives, if we're really going to be generous, which is like perspective 1 is I'm hungry, and despite the fact that I'm at this funeral, like I am emotionally not here. I'm just too hungry to care about mourning or this person's death or decorum or anything like that. And everyone else's perspective is like caught in the drama of like the funeral. And so it's kind of funny to like, after all of this, to float back around to this one person who's, like not even been tuned into the fact that like people are, having big emotions about this recently dead person. And is still talking about fried chicken and wings, right? I would say that being kind of the one note guy, when a scene is going sideways, will produce more laughs than trying to like force anybody else in the scene to adopt a single perspective. If you think that there's an opportunity to like reinforce someone else's point of view and try to limit it down to like 1 to 2 perspectives, go for it. And this is again why I think that like group games should be practiced with, an ensemble you normally work with, because if you did something like that, if you did go like, hey, I think if people abandon my idea, I'm going to reinforce this 3rd or 4th person's idea, other team members will see what you're doing, right? and they'll just jump in and reinforce your idea and whatever else, because everyone will be pretty practiced in having 1 to 2 perspectives in a group game. But if you're with a bunch of randos at a jam or whatever, slow down, be patient, do a whole lot more listening, and just become the one note guy. And sometimes you'll be able to like pull off a big laugh, but like you're only one person in an improv scene, so like you can't save an improv scene. Okay, I will say this, like those are the 6 tips, but I want to take a little bit of time because I spend a lot of time talking about having 2 perspectives. Having a singular perspective, being peas in the pod, is extremely powerful and is probably the one way that you can really develop like super strong improv skills, is being in like a, like 3 or more person group game where you're all the same perspective, right? Because the discipline is going to be this. We all feel this very specific flavor of emotion about this specific idea, right? And we are all going to build on that specific flavor of emotion on this specific idea. So if someone is, I don't know, annoyed by like a coworker who says the word folders without pronouncing the L, right? I have a coworker who does this, and I think it's such an odd pronunciation, but someone who doesn't pronounce the L in folders, we all have to be annoyed in the same way. So like we all can't, one person can't be annoyed and like thinks it's like whatever, kind of cute, but another person annoyed and like wants to kill that person. We all have to be the same flavor of annoyed, right? We can heighten, and maybe that's something that's like in a different video, but heightening is very distinct because heightening takes logical steps toward a single kind of flavor emotion, but in an increasing way. So the perspective is the same. Maybe this is going to be a different video because I'm already like at 40 minutes, but yeah. So like I think, these 2 executives who are at the yoga retreat, if their perspective is like, I just feel really at peace here because of all of the evil I do everywhere else. This is my sanctuary where I get in touch with the fact that I could be a good person. Again, right? The other person's perspective has to be the exact same, which is like, yeah, I know. My parents, my family, my kids, everybody knows that I am evil. Pure evil. And I kind of like it. But every once in a while, I come here just to remember I'm kind of a cool guy too. And we can build on that and bring out more versions of why that's true. But we have to stay true and specific to that idea. And watching 7 people all at a yoga retreat, all like being like, I do this evil thing in my day-to-day job, but you put me in Warrior 1, and I just remember that I'm just another blade of grass in God's cosmic field or whatever. But in any case, 1 to 2 perspectives max. Maybe I should do a different like video just on peas in the pod, having a lot of precision around what the perspective is, and sometimes even like I would say a really important part of framing and game is like what is exactly going on so we can play it to your specifications. We want to get your dumb idea like in HD, I would say 4K. We want 4K your silly idea. In any case, I hope you guys like these videos. Like I said, I'm trying to get more like consistent about doing them, and I hope that you guys like them. I'm like always drop a comment and give me any suggestions that you have. I love doing these videos, and I'm getting better at them, and I like my new setup. That makes it easy for me to produce the videos. Hit like, hit subscribe. I want to do more of these, and yeah, until next time.